in the gentle rolling hills of ancient Canaan, where the evening breeze carries the scent of wild thyme and the distant bleating of sheep, there lived a man named Isaac, whose very name meant laughter, a reminder of the joy that had filled his mother Sarah's tent when she learned she would bear a child in her old age. Isaac had grown into a peaceful man, contemplative and quiet, spending his days tending to the vast flocks his father Abraham had left him, walking through fields of barley that swayed like golden waves in the warm wind. As the years passed with the steady rhythm of seasons, Isaac's heart grew heavy with concern, for he had reached the age of 40 and had not yet found a wife. His father Abraham, before his death, had been adamant that Isaac should not marry from among the Canaanite women, but should find a bride from among their own people in the distant land of Haran. And so it was that Abraham's faithful servant Eliezer had journeyed many days across the desert, following the ancient trade routes, his camels laden with gifts of gold and silver and fine cloth. The story of how Eliezer found Rebekah at the well has been told countless times around evening fires, how she had offered water not only to him, but to all his camels, displaying the kindness and generosity that would make her a worthy matriarch. When Rebekah first saw Isaac, he was walking in the fields at eventide, meditating in the fading light, and something in her heart recognized him as her destiny. Their meeting was gentle, like two streams converging into a peaceful river, and Isaac brought her into his mother Sarah's tent, finding comfort after his mother's death in Rebekah's warm presence. For 20 years, Isaac and Rebekah lived together in harmony, but their tent remained empty of children's laughter. They prayed earnestly, their voices rising with the smoke of their evening offerings, and finally, their prayers were answered. Rebekah conceived, but her pregnancy was troubled, for she felt a great struggle within her womb, as if two nations were already at war before seeing the light of day. When she inquired of the Lord, she received a mysterious prophecy that two peoples would be separated from her body, and the elder would serve the younger. When the time came for her delivery, indeed there were twins. The first emerged red and hairy all over, like a little garment of fur, and they named him Esau, meaning rough or complete. Immediately after, his brother emerged, his tiny hand grasping Esau's heel, and they called him Jacob, the heel holder, the supplanter. From their earliest days, the brothers were as different as the sun and moon. Esau grew to be a skillful hunter, a man of the open fields who smelled of earth and wind and wild game, while Jacob was a quiet man, dwelling in tents, learning the ways of shepherding from his father, and the ancient stories from his mother. Isaac's eyes grew dim with age, the world becoming a blur of shadows and light, and he loved Esau because he brought him savory meat from his hunts, the taste reminding him of his younger, stronger days. But Rebekah loved Jacob, seeing in him something deeper, perhaps remembering the prophecy she had received. The love in that family was complicated, flowing in different directions like water finding various paths down a hillside. One day, when the sun hung heavy and orange in the sky, Jacob was cooking a thick stew of red lentils, the aroma filling the camp, when Esau returned from the field, exhausted and faint with hunger. The smell of the stew overwhelmed him, and he begged Jacob for some of that red pottage, his need so great that when Jacob cunningly asked for his birthright in exchange, Esau agreed without hesitation, despising his birthright for a moment's satisfaction. Thus, with a bowl of lentils, the destiny of nations shifted. Though Esau, satisfying his hunger, thought little of what he had given away. Years flowed by like a gentle river, and Isaac grew very old, his world now completely dark, navigating by sound and touch, and the familiar sense of his household. Believing his death was near, though he would live many more years, he called for Esau, his firstborn, his voice trembling with age. He asked his beloved son to take his quiver and bow, to go into the field and hunt game, to prepare the savory meat he loved, that he might eat and bless him before he died. Esau departed eagerly, his heart full of anticipation for the patriarchal blessing that would secure his future and that of his descendants. But Rebekah had been listening, hidden in the shadows of the tent, and her heart raced with the memory of the ancient prophecy. She quickly called Jacob, her voice urgent but quiet, telling him what she had heard. She instructed him to fetch 2 choice kids from the flock, promising to prepare them exactly as Isaac loved, with the herbs and spices that would remind him of Esau's wild game. Jacob protested, fear evident in his voice, pointing out that Esau was a hairy man while his own skin was smooth, and surely his father would feel the difference and curse him instead of blessing him. But Rebekah, driven by divine prophecy or maternal preference, perhaps both intertwined beyond separation, took the responsibility upon herself. She dressed Jacob in Esau's best garments, the ones that smelled of fields and freedom, of wind and wilderness. She placed the skins of the young goats upon his hands and the smooth part of his neck, creating an illusion of hairiness that might deceive Isaac's searching fingers. With the savory meat and fresh bread in his hands, Jacob entered his father's tent, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. "My father," Jacob said, his voice carefully controlled, and Isaac responded, asking who was there. "I am Esau, your firstborn," Jacob lied, the words heavy on his tongue. "I have done as you asked. Arise, sit and eat of my venison, that your soul may bless me." Isaac, surprised at the swiftness, questioned how he had found game so quickly, and Jacob, deepening his deception, claimed that the Lord had brought it to him. Still suspicious, Isaac called him near, his old hands reaching out, feeling the hairy hands, confused by the contradiction between the voice he heard and the touch he felt. "The voice is Jacob's voice," Isaac said slowly, "but the hands are the hands of Esau." Adin. The old man's fingers traced over the false hair again and again, his confusion evident. He asked directly, "Are you really my son Esau?" And Jacob, committed now to the deception, answered, "I am." Isaac ate the meal, drank the wine Jacob brought him, and then called his son to kiss him. As Jacob leaned close, Isaac smelled the borrowed garments, the scent of the outdoors that clung to Esau's clothes, and finally convinced, he released the blessing that would echo through generations. The blessing flowed from Isaac's lips like honey, like a river that could not be dammed or redirected. "See, the smell of my son is as the smell of a field which the Lord has blessed. May God give you of the dew of heaven, and the fatness of the earth, and plenty of grain and wine. Let people serve you, and nations bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be everyone who blesses you." Scarcely had Jacob left his father's presence, the blessing still warm on his head, when Esau returned from his hunt, triumphant, having prepared the savory meat with his own hands. He entered Isaac's tent with joy, announcing himself, only to feel the world crumble as Isaac trembled violently, realizing the deception. Esau's cry was bitter and great, echoing across the camp, a sound of anguish that would haunt Jacob's dreams for years to come. He begged for a blessing, any blessing, but Isaac could only offer him a lesser prophecy, that he would live by his sword, serve his brother, but eventually break free from his yoke. The hatred that grew in Esau's heart was like a flame fed by dry wood, and he comforted himself with thoughts of the mourning days for his father, after which he would kill his brother. When Rebekah learned of Esau's murderous intentions, she knew Jacob must flee. She convinced Isaac to send Jacob away to find a wife from among her brother Laban's daughters, using Esau's Hittite wives, who were a source of grief to both Isaac and Rebekah, as additional reasoning for the journey. So Joseph died, and they embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. But his bones would not remain there forever. His faith looked forward to the promise, to the day when his people would return to the land God had sworn to give them. Even in death, Joseph's hope was anchored not in the grandeur of Egypt where he had risen to such heights, but in the promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, promises that would outlive pyramids and kingdoms. The story of the patriarchs thus draws to a gentle close, like the setting of the sun after a long and eventful day. From Isaac's quiet meditation in the fields to his marriage with Rebekah, from the birth of the twins and the struggle that began even in the womb, through Jacob's deception and flight, his dream of the ladder reaching to heaven, his years of labor for the woman he loved, and his wrestling with the divine that transformed him from Jacob to Israel, each thread wove together into a tapestry of divine providence and human struggle. Joseph's journey from favored son to slave, from prisoner to prince, revealed how suffering could be transformed into salvation, how what was meant for evil could be used by God for good. His dreams, which had sparked such hatred, proved to be prophecies of preservation, not just for his family but for all of Egypt and the surrounding nations. The boy who had worn a coat of many colors became the man who wore the ring of Pharaoh. Yet his greatest achievement was not his political power, but his ability to forgive, to see God's hand in his suffering, and to use his position to preserve the chosen family. The patriarchs were not perfect men. They struggled with favoritism and deception, with fear and doubt, with rivalry and resentment. Yet through their imperfections, the divine purpose moved forward like a river that cannot be stopped, sometimes going underground, sometimes seeming to disappear, but always emerging again, always flowing toward its destination. Their stories remind us that God's plans often unfold through the messy realities of human life, through our failures as much as our successes, through our weakness as much as our strength. As the children of Israel settled in Goshen, multiplying and prospering, they carried with them the promises made to Abraham, that his descendants would be as numerous as the stars, that they would inherit the land of Canaan, that through them all nations would be blessed. They also carried the memory of Joseph's words, that God would surely visit them and bring them up out of Egypt. The years of plenty and the years of famine had passed, but the story was far from over. In the quietness of Goshen, away from the Egyptian cities, a family was becoming a people who would one day need deliverance, who would one day make the journey Joseph's bones awaited. The dreams and visions that had guided the patriarchs, Abraham's covenant under the stars, Isaac's blessing passed on in blindness, Jacob's ladder connecting heaven and earth, Joseph's sheaves and stars bowing down. These were not mere nighttime fantasies, but glimpses of a reality deeper than what eyes could see. They spoke of a plan that stretched across generations, a purpose that could turn slavery into salvation, exile into exodus, a family into a nation that would preserve the knowledge of the one true God through all the centuries to come. In the land of Goshen, as the sun set each evening and rose each morning, as the Nile flooded and receded in its eternal rhythm, as children were born and grew and had children of their own, the promise lived on. It lived in the stories told around evening fires, in the names given to children, in the memory of a God who had been faithful to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, and to Joseph. The patriarchs had passed from the scene, but their God remained, and his promises endured, as sure as the sunrise, as certain as the harvest, as unchanging as the stars that had witnessed his covenant with Abraham so many years before. Time moved with its steady pace, and the generation that had known Joseph began to fade away. New children were born who knew Egypt as their home, who had never seen the hills of Canaan, who knew the stories of the patriarchs only as ancient tales told by their elders. Yet in their blood flowed the promise, in their hearts lived the hope, and in their future waited the fulfillment of all that God had spoken. The comfortable years in Goshen would not last forever. The favor Joseph had earned would be forgotten by new dynasties who knew not what he had done for Egypt. The family that had come as honored guests would become seen as a threat, their prosperity arousing envy, their different customs causing suspicion, their growing numbers inspiring fear. But all of this was yet to come, hidden in the mists of the future, part of the greater plan that would include suffering and deliverance, wandering and homecoming, exile and return. For now, in the quietness of the narrative's end, there was peace. Jacob slept with his fathers in the cave of Machpelah. Joseph rested in his coffin in Egypt, awaiting the promised return. The brothers, reconciled and forgiven, lived out their days in Goshen, watching their children and grandchildren multiply under the Egyptian sun. The coat of many colors had long since disappeared. The dreams had been fulfilled. The wrestling match was over. The ladder to heaven had been climbed. What remained was the promise, eternal and unshakable, that the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob would be faithful to his word. And in this peaceful ending, there was also a beginning. For every ending in God's story becomes the seed of a new chapter. The patriarchs had played their parts, had run their race, had kept the faith. Now their descendants would carry forward the torch, would face their own tests, would have their own encounters with the divine. The God who had appeared to Abraham in Ur, to Isaac in Gerar, to Jacob at Bethel, to Joseph in dreams, would one day appear to Moses in a burning bush, calling him to deliver the people whose story had begun with these patriarchs. The quietness of evening settles over our tale like a soft blanket, bringing rest to the weary traveler who has journeyed with the patriarchs through their joys and sorrows, their failures and triumphs, their dreams and their realities. The ancient words have been spoken again, the timeless story retold, the eternal truths renewed in the hearing. As sleep approaches, as consciousness gently fades into dreams, may the peace that finally came to Jacob, the forgiveness that Joseph extended to his brothers, the faithfulness that God showed to all the patriarchs settle into the depths of the listening heart. The stars that Abraham saw still shine in the night sky. The God who made promises to the patriarchs still keeps his word. The ladder between heaven and earth still stands for those who have eyes to see it. And somewhere in the distance, barely audible but growing stronger with each passing generation, the footsteps of a people returning home can be heard, carrying with them the bones of Joseph and the promises of God, moving toward a destiny that was determined before the foundation of the world, yet worked out through the very human lives of the patriarchs. In the rhythm of breathing, in the beating of the heart, in the mysterious passage from waking to sleeping, the ancient story continues. It continues in every struggle between siblings, in every dream that seems impossible, in every journey away from home and every return, In every betrayal and every forgiveness, in every moment when heaven touches earth and the ordinary becomes sacred. The patriarchs sleep, but their story lives, whispering its truths to all who have ears to hear, offering its comfort to all who need rest, promising that what God begins, He will complete, that what seems like an ending is often a beginning, that even in the darkest pit or the most unjust imprisonment, the purposes of love are being worked out. As the narrative draws to its close, as the last words settle like dew upon the grass, there remains only the invitation to rest, to sleep, to dream perhaps of ladders and angels, of coats and sheaves, of wrestling and blessing, of forgiveness and reconciliation. The God of the patriarchs neither slumbers nor sleeps, keeping watch over His children through all the long nights of history, faithful to His promises, working all things together for good, writing straight with crooked lines, bringing beauty from ashes, salvation from slavery, hope from despair. The tale is told, the journey completed, the lesson learned or perhaps simply absorbed into the deeper places of the soul where truth resides without words. Like Joseph's bones waiting in Egypt, we too wait for the fulfillment of promises, for the completion of journeys, for the reconciliation of all things. But the waiting is not empty. It is filled with the presence of the God who was with Joseph in the pit and the prison, with Jacob in his flight and his return, with Isaac in his blindness, with Abraham in his wandering. Let the ancient words bring their ancient comfort. Let the struggles of the patriarchs remind us that we are not alone in our struggles. Let their encounters with God kindle hope, that we too might meet Him in our ordinary places, in our dreams and our wrestling, in our failures and our victories. Let their story become part of our story, their God our God, their hope our hope, as we rest in the promise that He who began a good work will be faithful to complete it. The patriarchs have spoken their piece, lived their lives, left their legacy. Now they sleep, and we, having heard their story once again, can sleep too, carried by the same promises, held by the same hands, loved by the same God who chose Abraham, who blessed Isaac, who wrestled with Jacob, who exalted Joseph. In the great tapestry of redemption, their threads are woven, bright and dark, smooth and rough, creating a pattern that only makes sense when seen from above, from the perspective of eternity, from the heart of God who sees the end from the beginning. Rest now as the patriarchs rest. Dream as Joseph dreamed. Trust as Abraham trusted. Wrestle if you must, as Jacob wrestled, but know that the blessing comes to those who hold on through the night. The morning will come, as it always comes, bringing with it new mercies, new possibilities, new chapters in the story that began so long ago with a man named Abraham, looking up at the stars and believing the impossible promise of God. The sheep are quiet in their folds. The stars shine in their courses. The river of God's purpose flows on toward its destination. All is well, all will be well, for the God of the patriarchs lives, and His promises endure from generation to generation, world without end, in the gentle rhythm of sleeping and waking, of breathing in and breathing out, of listening and remembering, of closing our eyes in trust and opening them in hope. Thus ends the story of the patriarchs, not with fanfare or thunder, but with the quiet confidence of those who know they are part of something larger than themselves, something that began before them and will continue after them, something as certain as the promises of God, as enduring as His love, as gentle as His care for those who trust in Him. Sleep comes softly now, bringing dreams perhaps of ancient times and eternal truths, of earthly struggles and heavenly visions, of the God who was, and is to come, faithful to all generations, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of Joseph and his brothers, the God who watches over his children as they sleep, who gives his beloved rest. The words fade into silence, the story into memory, the memory into dreams, and in those dreams, perhaps, the ladder appears again. The angels ascend and descend, and the voice of God speaks as he spoke to the patriarchs, calling each by name, promising his presence, assuring his love, confirming his covenant, whispering the eternal truth that he will never leave nor forsake those who put their trust in him. In this promise, in this presence, in this peace, the weary find rest, the troubled find calm, the restless find home. And so the ancient tale concludes, having woven its way through the generations, through betrayal and reconciliation, through dreams and reality, through wrestling and blessing, to arrive at this moment of quiet rest, this gentle surrendering to sleep, this trusting that the God who kept the patriarchs will keep us too, through all our nights and all our days, until that final morning when all dreams come true, all promises are fulfilled, and the long journey home is complete. Until then, we rest in the story. We sleep in the promise. We dream in the hope that what God has begun, he will surely finish, and what he has promised, he will surely perform. The story of the patriarchs becomes a lullaby now, its familiar rhythms soothing the mind, its ancient wisdom calming the heart, its timeless promises securing the soul. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word continues, speaking peace to the troubled, rest to the weary, hope to the discouraged, forgiveness to the guilty, reconciliation to the estranged, homecoming to the wanderer. The patriarchs found all these things in their God, and their God remains unchanging and unchangeable, faithful and true, the same yesterday, today, and forever. Let the last thoughts before sleep be of Joseph forgiving his brothers, of Jacob receiving the new name Israel, of Isaac blessing his sons, of Abraham believing the promise. Let the heart rest in the knowledge that the God who guided them guides still, that the promises made to them extend to all who believe, that the ladder between heaven and earth remains in place for all who need to know that they are not alone, not forgotten, not without hope. The God of the patriarchs is the God of the present moment, as near as breath, as close as heartbeat, as real as the pillow beneath the head, as comforting as the blanket that brings warmth. Sleep now, blessed and peaceful sleep, carrying within it the echoes of ancient stories, the whispers of eternal promises, the assurance of divine presence. The patriarchs sleep in their caves and tombs, awaiting the resurrection morning. Joseph's bones rest in their coffin, awaiting the Exodus. The promises rest in the heart of God, awaiting their perfect fulfillment. And we rest too, held by the same everlasting arms that held the patriarchs, blessed by the same voice that blessed them, loved by the same love that chose them, kept by the same power that preserved them through all their journeys. The narrative river has reached its delta, spreading out into countless streams of meaning, flowing gently into the ocean of sleep. The journey that began with Isaac and Rebekah has carried us through all the peaks and valleys of human experience, showing us that in every generation, in every life, the same struggles play out, the same grace appears, the same God remains faithful. The particulars change the names, the places, the specific challenges, but the underlying truth remains constant. God is with his people, working through their lives, even their mistakes and failures, to accomplish his purposes of love. As consciousness yields to unconsciousness, as the analytical mind releases its grip, and the deeper mind takes over, may the story of the patriarchs continue its work in the hidden places of the soul, strengthening faith, nurturing hope, deepening love. May their struggles encourage us in our struggles, their victories inspire us to persevere, their encounters with God awaken us to his presence in our own lives. May their story become a bridge between the ancient and the modern, the temporal and the eternal, the human and the divine. The final words hover like a benediction over the approaching sleep. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of Joseph and all the patriarchs, bless you and keep you. May his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May he lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Peace in the sleeping, peace in the waking, peace in the journey, peace in the arrival, peace in the struggle, peace in the surrender, peace in the knowledge that you are known, loved, chosen, and kept by the God who never sleeps, who watches over Israel, who numbers the hairs of your head and the days of your life, who began a good work and will be faithful to complete it. Rest now. Rest in the story. Rest in the promise. Rest in the God of the patriarchs, who is your God too, if you will have him. The ancient tale is told, the eternal truth proclaimed, the divine lullaby sung. All that remains is sleep, blessed sleep, wherein dreams may come as they came to Jacob and Joseph, wherein rest is given as it was finally given to all the patriarchs after their long journeys, wherein peace settles like dew upon the grass, refreshing and renewing for whatever tomorrow may bring. The story ends as all good stories end, not with conclusion, but with continuation, not with closure, but with opening, not with finality, but with promise. The patriarchs passed their torch to their children to their children's children, down through all the generations to this very moment, this very breath, this very heartbeat. Their story is our story, their God our God, their hope our hope, their rest our rest. And now, as the last word fades into silence, as the final thought dissolves into dream, as the ultimate surrender to sleep arrives, there remains only gratitude. Gratitude for the story, gratitude for the promise, gratitude for the God who gives his beloved sleep, who grants rest to the weary, who provides peace that passes understanding. In this gratitude, in this peace, in this rest, the story of the patriarchs finds its perfect ending, which is really just another beginning, another chapter in the never-ending story of God's love for his people, his faithfulness to his promises, his presence in every moment of every life, waking and sleeping, struggling and resting, wandering and arriving home. The gentle breathing of sleep takes over now, rhythmic as the waves upon the shore of consciousness, as regular as the heartbeat that continues its faithful work through all the hours of rest. In this breathing, in this rhythm, the story continues its quiet work, settling into the deepest places of memory and imagination, where truth lives not in words, but in knowing, not in hearing, but in being, not in understanding, but in trusting. The patriarchs have become companions in the journey toward sleep, their struggles and triumphs a soft accompaniment to the letting go that sleep requires. Consider how Isaac found peace in meditation in the fields at eventide, how that quiet soul who lived between the towering figures of Abraham, his father, and Jacob his son, found his own gentle way of walking with God. His story reminds us that not every life needs to be dramatic to be meaningful, that sometimes the greatest faith is found in quiet steadiness, in patient waiting, in peaceful acceptance of one's place in the greater story. Isaac's blindness in old age became not a limitation, but a different way of seeing, perceiving truth through touch and smell, and the deep knowing that comes from years of walking with God. Rebecca, too, carries lessons into our rest, the young woman who showed such kindness at the well, who had the courage to leave everything familiar to follow God's call into an unknown future. Her story speaks to the brave choices that shape destinies, the moments of decision that echo through generations. Even her later deception, born of maternal love and prophetic knowledge, reminds us that God's purposes often work through human complexity, through the tangled motivations and imperfect actions of those He chooses to use. The twins, Jacob and Esau, wrestling even in the womb, speak to the struggles that mark human existence from its very beginning. Their story is everyone's story, the competition for blessing, the desire for approval, the long journey toward reconciliation. That Esau could eventually run to embrace the brother who had wronged him. That Jacob could bow 7 times in humility before the brother he had deceived, shows that no breach is too wide for forgiveness to bridge, no wound too deep for time and grace to heal. Jacob's night of wrestling becomes a metaphor that resonates through all time, the struggle with the divine that marks those who would know God deeply. His limp was his glory, the mark of one who had struggled with God and prevailed, not by winning, but by holding on, not by conquering, but by refusing to let go without a blessing. We all walk with some limp, some mark of our own wrestling, some evidence of the nights we have struggled with questions too large for answers, with pain too deep for easy comfort, with God too mysterious for simple understanding. The ladder at Bethel stands forever as a sign that heaven and earth are connected, that angels still ascend and descend on missions of mercy, that no place is too ordinary to become a gateway to the divine. Every stone can become a pillow for holy dreams, every wilderness a place of encounter, every journey an opportunity for transformation. The God who met Jacob in his flight meets us in ours, turning our running from into running to, our escape into pilgrimage, our fear into faith. Joseph's dreams remind us that God's visions for our lives often exceed our understanding, that the dreams He gives may take years to unfold, may require passage through pits and prisons before reaching palaces. His story teaches patience with God's timing, trust in His purposes even when circumstances seem to contradict His promises. The boy who dreamed of sheaves bowing had to learn to bow himself, had to descend into slavery to ascend to rulership, had to lose everything to gain more than he had ever imagined. The coat of many colors, torn from Joseph and dipped in blood, becomes transformed in our meditation into a symbol of all the special gifts that make us targets of envy, all the blessings that become burdens, all the privileges that lead to persecution. Yet Joseph's story shows that what others mean for evil, God can transform into good, that the very things that seem to destroy us can become the instruments of our destiny and the salvation of many. Potiphar's house and the prison that followed teach us about integrity in hidden places, about maintaining faithfulness when no one is watching, about serving well even in unjust circumstances. Joseph's refusal to betray his master's trust, even when it cost him his freedom, speaks to the choices we face between immediate gratification and lasting honor, between taking what we could grasp and waiting for what God would give. The dreams of the butler and baker, interpreted in prison, remind us that God's gifts operate even in our confinement, that our purpose can be fulfilled even in our limitations, that we can serve others even when we ourselves need deliverance. Joseph's plea to be remembered, followed by 2 years of being forgotten, resonates with everyone who has felt overlooked, whose good deeds have gone unnoticed, whose hopes have been deferred, until the heart grows sick with waiting. But then comes Pharaoh's dream, and suddenly everything changes, not because Joseph forced it or manipulated it, but because God's timing had finally arrived. The years of preparation in slavery and prison had shaped Joseph into the man who could stand before Pharaoh and speak truth, who could administer a nation's resources with wisdom, who could save many lives through careful planning and fair distribution. Our own preparations, our own times of waiting, our own seasons in various prisons are rarely wasted if we allow them to shape us for the work God has prepared for us to do. The 7 years of plenty followed by 7 years of famine speak to the rhythms of life, the cycles of abundance and scarcity that mark every human experience. Joseph's wisdom in storing during plenty for the time of want teaches us about preparing for the future, about not consuming everything in the present, about the discipline of saving and the wisdom of planning. Yet it also reminds us that we cannot ultimately control our circumstances, that both plenty and want come from God's hand, that our security lies not in our storehouses, but in His faithfulness. The reconciliation between Joseph and his brothers unfolds slowly, like a carefully orchestrated dance of recognition and redemption. Joseph's tests were not vindictive, but restorative, designed to reveal whether his brothers had changed, whether they had learned from their past, whether they would repeat with Benjamin what they had done to him. Their transformation, especially Judah's offer to take Benjamin's place, shows that people can change, that the heart can be renovated, that those who once chose cruelty can learn to choose sacrifice. You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. These words of Joseph echo through eternity as perhaps the greatest statement of faith in divine providence ever spoken. They transform victimhood into victory, bitterness into blessing, revenge into reconciliation. They show us a way to understand our own sufferings, our own betrayals, our own disappointments, not as meaningless cruelties, but as parts of a larger pattern we cannot yet see fully, threads in a tapestry whose beauty will only be revealed when the work is complete. The aged Jacob, blessing his grandsons with crossed hands, deliberately choosing to elevate the younger over the elder once again, shows us that God's ways are not our ways, that His choices often confound human expectation, that blessing flows not according to birth order or human convention, but according to divine purpose. The pattern repeats through Scripture and through life. God choosing the unlikely, using the weak, elevating the humble, working through those the world overlooks. Jacob's final blessings to his 12 sons paint a picture of diversity within unity, of different gifts and different destinies, all contributing to one people's story. Not all would be leaders like Judah, not all would be numerous like Joseph's sons, but each had a place, each had a purpose, each was included in the blessing and the promise. Their differences were not flaws to be eliminated, but variations to be celebrated, distinct notes that together would create the symphony of a nation. The death of Jacob and his burial in the cave of Machpelah speak to the importance of connection to our ancestors, of honoring those who came before, of maintaining the link between generations. The great procession from Egypt to Canaan to bury him shows that even in death, the patriarchs pointed toward the promised land, toward the future God had promised, toward the hope that transcended their individual lives. Joseph's forgiveness of his brothers after their father's death when they feared he had only been restraining himself for Jacob's sake, shows us forgiveness that is genuine and complete, not dependent on external circumstances or the presence of others. His tears, when they still feared him, reveal the pain that lingers even in forgiveness, the sadness that trust once broken is not easily restored, the recognition that some wounds, though healed, leave scars that remain tender to the touch. The story of the patriarchs thus becomes a mirror in which we see our own stories reflected, our own struggles illuminated, our own hopes encouraged. Their world was different from ours in countless ways. They lived in tents, we live in houses. They measured wealth in flocks, we measure it in different currencies. They heard God in dreams and visions, we hear him in different ways. Yet the fundamental realities remain unchanged. The struggle to trust God's promises, the challenge of family relationships, the journey from self-centeredness to service, the transformation of suffering into wisdom, the power of forgiveness to heal what seemed unhealable. As sleep deepens, as the conscious mind releases its grip, and the unconscious takes over, these ancient stories work their way into our dreams, becoming part of our internal landscape, shaping how we understand ourselves and our place in the larger story. We are all children of the patriarchs in some sense, inheritors of their struggles and their promises, participants in the ongoing story of God's interaction with humanity. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is not a distant deity of ancient times, but the living God of this present moment, as near as our breath, as intimate as our heartbeat, as involved in our stories as he was in theirs. The ladder still stands between heaven and earth. Angels still ascend and descend. God still speaks to those who have ears to hear, still wrestles with those who will not let go without a blessing, still works through dreams and circumstances to accomplish his purposes. In the quietness of approaching sleep, we can release our grip on the day's concerns, trusting that the God who watched over the patriarchs watches over us. We can let go of our need to control, remembering that Joseph's path to his destiny was nothing he could have planned or orchestrated. We can release our bitterness over past wrongs, inspired by Joseph's forgiveness of his brothers. We can trust that our struggles have meaning, that our suffering is not senseless, that somewhere in the divine plan, what seems evil is being transformed into good. The patriarchs sleep in their caves, their bodies returning to dust, but their spirits alive in the memory of God, awaiting the day of resurrection, when all promises will be fulfilled, all hopes realized, all dreams interpreted in the light of eternal day. Joseph's bones, carried eventually from Egypt in the Exodus, remind us that death is not the end of the story, that God's promises extend beyond the grave, that the hope of the patriarchs reaches into eternity. As we drift deeper into sleep, carried by the rhythm of these ancient stories, we join the great cloud of witnesses who have found in the God of the patriarchs a refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Their stories become our lullabies, their struggles our comfort, their victories our hope. We are not alone in our journey. We walk a path made smooth by countless feet before us, lit by the testimony of those who have proven God faithful through all generations. The transformation from Jacob to Israel happens in each of us as we learn to struggle with God rather than merely about him, as we move from deception to truth, from grasping to receiving, from running to resting. The dream of the ladder comes to each of us in our own Bethel moments, when ordinary places become sacred spaces, when we suddenly realize that surely the Lord is in this place, and we knew it not. We each have our coat of many colors, some gift, some blessing, some distinction that sets us apart, and perhaps makes us targets of envy or misunderstanding. We each face our pit experiences, those times when we are cast down by those who should love us, when our dreams seem to mock us, when darkness surrounds us, and we cannot see the way forward. We each have our times in Potiphar's house when we must choose between integrity and advancement, between righteousness and ease, between God's way and the world's way. We all know the prison experiences when we have done right and suffered for it, when justice seems absent and hope deferred. We all have our opportunities to interpret dreams for others, to use our gifts even in our confinement, to serve even when we ourselves need deliverance. We all have our moments of being forgotten, when those we helped do not remember us, when our good deeds seem to vanish without trace, when we wonder if God Himself has forgotten our plight. But we also have our Pharaoh's dream moments, when suddenly everything changes, when years of preparation suddenly make sense, when the very experiences that seem to disqualify us become the qualifications for the work God has for us. We have our 7 years of plenty to prepare for the 7 years of famine, our opportunities to gather and store and prepare for future challenges, our chances to position ourselves to help others when the lean times come. And we have our reconciliation opportunities, our chances to forgive those who wronged us, to see God's hand in our hardships, to speak words of peace to those who expect judgment. We have our moments to say, "You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good," to transform our victim story into a victor story, to see our scars not as disfigurements, but as decorations, evidence of battles fought and survived, of wrestling matches that left us blessed. The story of the Patriarchs is ultimately a love story, God's love for flawed human beings who continually disappoint Him, yet through whom He chooses to work His purposes. It's about a love that persists through deception and doubt, through wrestling and wandering, through pits and prisons, through famine and plenty, through life and death itself. This love is not sentimental or soft. It's fierce and transformative, demanding and liberating, painful and healing. As we sink deeper into sleep, may this love surround us like the everlasting arms, holding us through the night watches, guarding our hearts and minds, preparing us for whatever tomorrow may bring. May we rest in the knowledge that the God who was faithful to the patriarchs will be faithful to us, that the promises He made to them extend to us, that we are part of the same great story of redemption that began with Abraham looking at the stars and believing God's impossible promise. The night deepens, and with it comes the peace that the patriarchs finally found. Isaac's quiet meditation, Jacob's hard-won blessing, Joseph's dreams fulfilled beyond imagination. Their peace becomes our peace, their rest our rest, their God our God. In the silence between heartbeats, in the pause between breaths, in the space between waking and sleeping, the ancient story continues its eternal work, weaving its truths into our souls, its promises into our dreams, its hope into our tomorrows. Sleep now, blessed sleep, carrying within it all the wisdom of the patriarchs, all the faithfulness of their God, all the hope of promises yet to be fulfilled. The story has been told, the truth proclaimed, the lullaby sung. All that remains is rest deep, peaceful, restorative rest in the arms of the God who neither slumbers nor sleeps, who keeps watch over His children through all the dark hours, who turns even our sleep into sanctuary, our dreams into visions, our rest into preparation for the journey that continues with the morning light. The patriarchs have spoken their piece, lived their lives, passed on their legacy. Their story becomes our story. Their faith our faith, their God our God, as we rest in the promise that He who began a good work will be faithful to complete it, that what He has promised, He is able to perform, that underneath are the everlasting arms, holding, supporting, carrying us through every valley and over every mountain, through every night and into every morning, until that final dawn when all shadows flee, all dreams are fulfilled, and the long journey home is complete. In this assurance, in this hope, in this peace, let sleep come fully now, deep and restoring, peaceful and renewing. The God of the patriarchs stands watch. The promises remain sure. The morning will come. All is well. Rest now. Rest in the story. Rest in the promise. Rest in the God who gives His beloved sleep. The ancient tale is told, its work complete for now, its truths planted deep in the soil of the soul, waiting to bloom with the morning light. Peace, perfect peace, the peace of the patriarchs, the peace of God, settling now like a blanket of stars over the sleeping earth, over the resting soul, over the quieted mind, over the trusting heart. Sleep, rest, peace. The story continues in dreams, in rest, in the faithful watching of the God who never leaves nor forsakes His own. Amen. Selah. It is finished, and it begins again, world without end, in the quietness of holy sleep. Jacob departed, leaving behind everything familiar, carrying only a staff and the supplies for his journey. The blessing he had stolen sitting heavy on his shoulders like a cloak made of lead. As he walked, the landscape changed from the familiar hills of Canaan to stranger territories, each step taking him further from home and deeper into an uncertain future. The sun traced its arc across the sky as he walked, and when darkness began to fall, he found himself in a certain place where he would have to spend the night. The place seemed ordinary enough, a clearing among the hills where travelers might rest, with stones scattered about that could serve as protection from the wind. Jacob, exhausted from his journey and the emotional weight of recent events, took one of the stones and placed it under his head as a pillow, though comfort was far from his mind. As he lay down on the hard ground, looking up at the stars beginning to pierce the darkening sky, sleep overtook him like a gentle wave. And then, in that liminal space between waking and sleeping, between earth and heaven, Jacob dreamed a dream that would transform not only his understanding, but the very ground on which he slept. He saw a ladder, or perhaps a stairway, set up on the earth with its top reaching to heaven itself, bridging the gap between the mortal and divine realms. Upon this celestial structure, angels of God were ascending and descending, their forms luminous and ethereal, engaged in constant motion, in perpetual service between heaven and earth. Above it all, at the very top of the ladder, stood the Lord Himself, and His voice came to Jacob like distant thunder, like the sound of many waters, yet clear and intimate as a whisper in his ear. I am the Lord, the God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and to your descendants. Your descendants shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east, and to the north and to the south, and in you and your descendants shall all the families of the earth be blessed. The divine voice continued, each word settling into Jacob's soul like seeds into fertile soil. Behold, I am with you, and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land. For I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. The promise wrapped around Jacob like a protective embrace, assuring him that despite his deception, despite his flight, despite his fear, he was not abandoned, but was part of a greater plan that stretched back to his grandfather Abraham and forward to generations yet unborn. Jacob awakened from his sleep, as if emerging from deep water, his heart racing, his skin covered with the dew of dawn. The ordinary place had been transformed by his vision into something sacred and terrible. "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it," he said aloud, his voice shaking with awe. Fear gripped him, but it was the fear of standing on holy ground, of having glimpsed the mechanics of heaven itself. How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. As the first light of dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold, Jacob rose and took the stone he had used as a pillow, setting it up as a pillar, a memorial to this encounter with the divine. He poured oil on top of it, consecrating it, marking the spot where heaven had touched earth. He named the place Bethel, meaning house of God, though the city nearby had been called Luz. Then Jacob made a vow, his first recorded words directly to God, saying that if God would indeed be with him, keeping him on his journey, giving him bread to eat and clothing to wear, and bringing him back to his father's house in peace, then the Lord would be his God, and this stone would be God's house, and of all that God gave him, he would surely give a tenth back to God. With renewed purpose, though still carrying the weight of his past actions, Jacob continued his journey toward the land of the people of the East. The days blended into one another as he traveled, following ancient paths carved by countless travelers before him, until finally he came to a well in a field. 3 flocks of sheep were lying beside it waiting, for the stone upon the well's mouth was large, requiring multiple shepherds to move it. As Jacob approached and asked the shepherds where they were from, learning they were from Haran, his heart quickened. When he inquired if they knew Laban, the son of Nahor, they confirmed they did, and even as they spoke, Rachel, Laban's daughter, approached with her father's sheep. When Jacob saw Rachel, something stirred within him. Perhaps love at first sight, perhaps the recognition of destiny. With strength he didn't know he possessed, he rolled the great stone from the well's mouth himself and watered Laban's flock. Then, overcome with emotion at finding his family, at reaching his destination, at seeing this beautiful cousin who would become his beloved, Jacob kissed Rachel and wept aloud, telling her that he was her father's relative, Rebekah's son. Rachel ran to tell her father, and Laban, hearing the news of his sister's son, ran to meet Jacob, embracing him and bringing him to his house. For a month Jacob stayed, working without wages, until Laban, recognizing the value of his nephew's labor, asked what wages he desired. Jacob's answer was swift and certain: 7 years of service for Rachel, the younger daughter, for he loved her with a love that would endure through deception, disappointment, and long years of waiting. The 7 years passed as if they were but a few days. So great was Jacob's love for Rachel. But on the wedding night, after the celebrations and under cover of darkness and veils, Laban substituted Leah, the elder daughter with weak eyes, for Rachel. Only in the morning light did Jacob discover the deception. The deceiver himself deceived, experiencing the bitter taste of the very medicine he had administered to his own father. When he confronted Laban, his uncle simply replied that it was not the custom to give the younger before the elder, an echo of the very principle Jacob had violated in stealing Esau's blessing. Laban offered Rachel as well, in exchange for another 7 years of service, and Jacob, trapped by love and circumstance, agreed. Thus he found himself with two wives, sisters who would compete for his affection, their rivalry producing the 12 sons who would become the tribes of Israel. Leah, unloved but fertile, bore Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah in succession, each name a cry to heaven or to her husband for the love she craved. Rachel, beloved but barren, gave her maid Bilhah to Jacob, who bore Dan and Naphtali. Not to be outdone, Leah gave her maid Zilpah, who bore Gad and Asher. Then Leah herself bore Issachar and Zebulun, and finally a daughter, Dinah. All this time Rachel remained barren, her womb closed, her heart aching with each child born to her sister and the maids. She prayed fervently, and finally God remembered Rachel, opening her womb. She conceived and bore a son, naming him Joseph, saying, "God has taken away my reproach," and expressing her hope that the Lord would add another son to her. Joseph's birth marked a turning point, for after 14 years of service and 6 more years of building his own wealth through clever breeding of Laban's flocks, Jacob desired to return to his homeland. The relationship between Jacob and Laban had grown strained over the years, with Laban changing Jacob's wages 10 times, always to his own advantage, though God intervened to ensure Jacob prospered despite his uncle's schemes. Jacob noticed that Laban's attitude toward him had changed, and the sons of Laban murmured that Jacob had taken away all that was their father's. In a dream, the angel of God instructed Jacob to return to the land of his birth, reminding him of the vow he had made at Bethel. Jacob called Rachel and Leah to the field, away from listening ears, and explained the situation, how their father had cheated him, how God had been with him, and how God had now commanded him to return. The sisters, feeling no inheritance or portion in their father's house, agreed to leave. So Jacob rose up, set his children and wives on camels, and drove away all his livestock and possessions, beginning the journey back to Isaac, his father, in the land of Canaan. Unbeknownst to Jacob, Rachel stole her father's household idols, perhaps as insurance, perhaps from lingering belief, or perhaps to deprive her father of what he valued. 3 days passed before Laban learned of their flight. He pursued them for 7 days, finally overtaking them in the mountain of Gilead. But God came to Laban in a dream by night, warning him to speak neither good nor bad to Jacob. The confrontation between uncle and nephew was tense, with Laban searching for his stolen idols but finding nothing, as Rachel sat upon them, claiming she could not rise due to the way of women. Finally they made a covenant, setting up a heap of stones as a witness between them, calling it Gilead, the heap of witness, agreeing to part in peace, though the peace was uneasy, built on mutual distrust and divine intervention. As Jacob continued his journey homeward, angels of God met him, and he called the place Mahanaim, meaning 2 camps, for he said, "This is God's camp." But as he drew closer to the land of Seir, the country of Edom, where Esau dwelt, fear gripped his heart. He sent messengers ahead to Esau, instructing them to speak humbly, calling Esau my lord, and himself your servant, telling of his sojourn with Laban and his acquired wealth, seeking to find favor in his brother's sight. The messengers returned with alarming news. Esau was coming to meet him with 400 men. Terror and distress overwhelmed Jacob. He divided his people and flocks into 2 camps, reasoning that if Esau attacked one, the other might escape. Then he prayed desperately to the God of Abraham and Isaac, reminding God of his promises, acknowledging his own unworthiness, begging for deliverance from his brother's hand. That night, Jacob selected an elaborate gift for Esau: 200 female goats and 20 male goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 milk camels with their colts, 40 cows and 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys and 10 male donkeys. He arranged them in droves, each separated from the next, instructing his servants to tell Esau that these were gifts from his servant Jacob, who was coming behind. His strategy was to appease Esau with wave after wave of gifts before meeting him face to face. After sending his family and possessions across the ford of Jabbok, Jacob remained alone on the far side as darkness fell. And there, in that solitude, in that darkness, a man appeared and wrestled with him until the breaking of day. This was no ordinary wrestling match, but something primal and spiritual, a physical manifestation of all Jacob's struggles, with his brother, with his uncle, with his guilt, with his destiny, with God himself. They grappled through the night hours, neither gaining clear advantage, their bodies locked in combat that was both fierce and strangely intimate. The mysterious opponent, seeing that he did not prevail against Jacob, touched the socket of his hip, and Jacob's hip was displaced. Yet still he held on, his grip desperate and determined. As dawn approached, the man said, "Let me go, for the day is breaking." But Jacob, recognizing the divine nature of his opponent, responded, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." "What is your name?" the stranger asked, though surely he knew it. "Jacob," came the answer, the name that meant supplanter, deceiver, the name that carried all his shame and cunning. "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob," the divine wrestler declared, "but Israel, for you have striven with God and with humans, and have prevailed." The new name meant one who struggles with God, or God strives, a name that would define not just Jacob but all his descendants, a people marked by their wrestling with the divine. Jacob asked for his opponent's name, but received only a blessing in response, a blessing earned not through deception, but through persistent struggle, through holding on when everything in him must have wanted to let go. As the sun rose upon him, Jacob named the place Peniel, meaning face of God, for he said, "I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered." He crossed over Penuel, limping because of his hip, marked forever by his encounter with the divine, bearing in his body the evidence of his transformation from Jacob to Israel. As Jacob lifted up his eyes, he saw Esau coming with his 400 men. Quickly he arranged his family, placing the maids and their children first, Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph last, protecting his most beloved. He himself passed before them all, bowing to the ground 7 times as he approached his brother, each bow an act of humility, a wordless apology, a recognition of the wrong he had done. But Esau ran to meet him, and embraced him, and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept together. The years of anger had somehow melted away, replaced by the simple joy of brothers reunited. Esau's questions about the women and children, about the droves of animals he had met, were answered with humble words from Jacob, insisting that Esau accept his gifts, for seeing his brother's face was like seeing the face of God, so kindly had he received him. The reconciliation was real, but complicated. Esau offered to journey together, but Jacob, still cautious, perhaps still fearful, made excuses about the children being tender, and the flocks with young needing gentle treatment. They parted peacefully, Esau returning to Seir, while Jacob journeyed to Succoth, where he built a house and made booths for his cattle, before eventually coming to the city of Shechem in the land of Canaan, where he bought a parcel of ground and erected an altar, calling it El Elohe Israel, God, the God of Israel. Years passed in relative peace, with Jacob's family growing and prospering, though not without troubles. The incident with Dinah and the revenge of Simeon and Levi brought danger and forced another move. God appeared to Jacob again, commanding him to return to Bethel, to the place of his first divine encounter. There Jacob built an altar, and God appeared to him once more, confirming his name change to Israel and renewing the covenant promises made to Abraham and Isaac. It was during the journey from Bethel that Rachel, pregnant with her second child, went into hard labor. As her soul was departing, for she died in childbirth, she named the baby Ben-Oni, son of my sorrow, but Jacob called him Benjamin, son of the right hand. Rachel was buried on the way to Ephrath, which is Bethlehem, and Jacob set up a pillar on her grave. The loss of his beloved Rachel marked Jacob deeply, a sorrow that would never fully heal. Among all of Jacob's 12 sons, Joseph stood apart, not just because he was the firstborn of Rachel, the wife Jacob had truly loved, but because of the special affection Jacob showed him. At 17 years old, Joseph was feeding the flock with his brothers, but he was different from them in every way. Where they were rough and practical, he was dreamy and perhaps somewhat pampered. Jacob had made him a coat of many colors, or perhaps a long-sleeved robe, a garment that set him apart, marking him as special, as beloved, as different. This favoritism created a poison in the family dynamics. Joseph's brothers saw that their father loved him more than all of them, and they hated him for it. They could not speak peacefully to him, their every interaction colored by resentment and jealousy. The coat was a daily reminder of their father's preference, a visible symbol of their own perceived inadequacy in their father's eyes. Joseph, young and perhaps naive to the full extent of his brother's animosity, made matters worse by reporting their bad behavior to their father. Whether this was done from a sense of righteousness or a desire to further ingratiate himself with Jacob, it deepened the divide between him and his brothers. He moved between them like a foreign element, never quite fitting in, always set apart by his father's love and his own distinctive nature. Then came the dreams, those mysterious visions that would shape not only Joseph's destiny, but the fate of entire nations. The first dream came to him in the night, vivid and strange, and with the impetuousness of youth, he shared it with his brothers. "Hear this dream which I have dreamed," he said to them, perhaps expecting them to be as fascinated as he was. "Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf arose and stood upright. And behold, your sheaves stood round about and bowed down to my sheaf." His brother's response was swift and bitter. "Will you indeed reign over us? Will you indeed have dominion over us?" They hated him even more for his dreams and for his words, for the implication that he, the younger, would rule over them, the elder brothers. It was Jacob and Esau all over again, the younger supplanting the elder, but this time announced in advance through dreams rather than accomplished through deception. But Joseph, seemingly oblivious to the growing danger, dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers and even to his father. "Behold, I have dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." This was too much even for Jacob, who rebuked him, saying, "What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you?" Yet even as he rebuked Joseph, Jacob kept the matter in mind, pondering these strange dreams and what they might mean. The brothers' hatred festered like an untended wound. One day, when they had gone to feed their father's flock in Shechem, Jacob sent Joseph to check on them, to see if it was well with them and with the flock. Joseph, obedient to his father, set out from the valley of Hebron, wearing that distinctive coat that marked him as his father's favorite. He wandered in the field, lost, until a man found him and directed him to Dothan, where his brothers had gone. The brothers saw him coming from afar, that colored coat visible across the distance like a banner, and before he came near to them, they conspired against him. "Behold, this dreamer comes," they said to one another, their words dripping with sarcasm and rage. "Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we will say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams." But Reuben, the eldest, perhaps feeling the weight of responsibility, or perhaps moved by some vestige of brotherly feeling, intervened. He suggested they shed no blood but cast Joseph into a pit in the wilderness, intending to rescue him later and restore him to their father. So when Joseph reached his brothers, they stripped him of his coat, that coat of many colors that had been the symbol of everything they resented, and they cast him into a pit that was empty, containing no water, only darkness, and the echoes of his cries. As they sat down to eat bread, their hearts hardened against their brothers' pleas from the pit. They lifted their eyes and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead, their camels bearing spices and balm and myrrh on their way down to Egypt. Judah, perhaps troubled by the thought of fratricide, or perhaps simply seeing an opportunity, said to his brothers, "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." His brothers agreed, and they drew Joseph up from the pit, and sold him to the passing merchants for 20 pieces of silver, the price of a slave. As the caravan disappeared into the distance, taking Joseph toward an uncertain fate in Egypt, the brothers were left with the coat and their conspiracy. Reuben, who had been absent during the sale, returned to the pit to rescue Joseph, only to find it empty. He tore his clothes in anguish, crying to his brothers, "The boy is gone, and I, where shall I go?" They took Joseph's coat and killed a young goat, dipping the coat in the blood until it was thoroughly stained. They brought it to their father, saying with feigned innocence, "We have found this. Please identify whether it is your son's coat or not." Jacob recognized it immediately, his worst fears seemingly confirmed. "It is my son's coat," he said, his voice breaking. "A fierce animal has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces." Jacob tore his garments and put sackcloth on his loins, and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and daughters rose up to comfort him, the very ones who had caused his grief offering consolation, but he refused to be comforted. "No," he said, "I shall go down to Sheol to my son, mourning." His grief was an ocean, vast and seemingly endless, while his sons carried the terrible weight of their secret, their father's tears a daily accusation against their consciences. Meanwhile, Joseph's journey to Egypt was one of confusion and terror. The boy who had been pampered and favored, who had worn a special coat and dreamed grand dreams, was now just another slave in a caravan heading to the greatest empire of the ancient world. The landscape changed from the familiar hills of Canaan to the flat, endless expanse of desert, and finally to the lush green ribbon of the Nile Valley, where pyramids rose like mountains made by human hands, and cities teemed with people speaking a language he did not understand. Joseph was sold to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard. It would have been easy for Joseph to succumb to bitterness, to rage against his brothers, his fate, even against God. But something in Joseph's character, perhaps forged in those moments of terror in the pit, perhaps inherent in his nature, chose a different path. He determined to serve faithfully, to work diligently, to maintain his integrity even in slavery. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man even as a slave. Everything he touched seemed to prosper. Potiphar noticed this unusual slave who brought blessing to everything he managed, and he made Joseph overseer of his house, entrusting all that he had to Joseph's care. The Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake, and the blessing of the Lord was on all that he had, in house and field. Potiphar concerned himself with nothing except the food he ate, so complete was his trust in Joseph. Joseph grew into a handsome and well-built young man, carrying himself with a dignity that transcended his slave status. His competence and character elevated him, but they also made him visible, perhaps dangerously so. Potiphar's wife began to notice this young Hebrew slave, his foreign beauty, his quiet strength, the way he moved through the house with authority despite his servitude. Day after day she cast her eyes upon him, desire growing into obsession. "Lie with me," she said to him one day, her invitation blunt and unmistakable. But Joseph refused, his response revealing both his integrity and his wisdom. "Behold, my master has no concern about anything in the house, and he has put everything that he has in my charge. He is not greater in this house than I am, nor has he kept back anything from me except you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" But she persisted, speaking to Joseph day after day, her desire turning to determination. Joseph avoided her as much as possible, but one day, when he went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house were there, she caught him by his garment, saying again, "Lie with me." Joseph's response was immediate and decisive. He fled, leaving his garment in her hand, running from the house as he had once been thrown into a pit, once again losing a garment that would be used against him. Scorned and furious, Potiphar's wife called to the men of her household, spinning a tale of attempted assault, holding Joseph's garment as evidence. When Potiphar came home, she repeated her fabrication, stoking his anger against the Hebrew slave who had allegedly betrayed his trust. Potiphar's anger burned hot, and he took Joseph and put him into the prison where the king's prisoners were confined. Once again, Joseph found himself in a pit, this time a prison, cast down from the heights of being overseer of a great house to the depths of an Egyptian dungeon. The injustice of it might have broken a lesser man, might have finally turned Joseph bitter and resentful. He had tried to do right and been punished for it. He had fled from sin and been imprisoned for righteousness. Yet even in prison, that divine presence that had accompanied him since leaving Canaan remained with him. The Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. Soon, the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's care all the prisoners who were in the prison, and whatever was done there, Joseph was the one who did it. The keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's charge, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it succeed. In that prison, Joseph encountered two men whose fates would eventually intertwine with his own. The chief cupbearer and the chief baker of the king of Egypt had offended their lord Pharaoh, and he had imprisoned them in the same prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard appointed Joseph to serve them, and he attended to them during their confinement. One night both the cupbearer and the baker dreamed dreams, each dream with its own meaning, and when Joseph came to them in the morning, he saw that they were troubled. Their faces were downcast, their spirits disturbed by visions they could not understand. Joseph, despite his own circumstances, showed concern for these fellow prisoners, asking them, "Why are your faces downcast today?" They responded that they had dreamed dreams, and there was no one to interpret them. Joseph's answer revealed his continued faith despite all his trials. "Do not interpretations belong to God? Please tell them to me." Here was Joseph, sold by his brothers because of his dreams, imprisoned unjustly, yet still believing that God spoke through dreams, still willing to serve as an interpreter of divine messages. The chief cupbearer spoke first, sharing his dream with eager hope. "In my dream there was a vine before me, and on the vine there were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, its blossoms shot forth, and the clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand." Joseph's interpretation came swiftly and clearly. This is its interpretation. The 3 branches are 3 days. In 3 days Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office, and you shall place Pharaoh's cup in his hand as formerly when you were his cupbearer. Then Joseph added a personal plea, a window into his own pain and hope. "Only remember me when it is well with you, and please do me the kindness to mention me to Pharaoh, and so get me out of this house. For I was indeed stolen out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also I have done nothing that they should put me into the pit." Leor, the chief baker, encouraged by the favorable interpretation given to his colleague, shared his own dream. "I also had a dream. There were 3 cake baskets on my head, and in the uppermost basket there were all sorts of baked food for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating it out of the basket on my head." Joseph's interpretation this time was grim, but he did not soften it or avoid the truth. This is its interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. In 3 days Pharaoh will lift up your head from you, and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat the flesh from you. The contrast between the 2 interpretations hung heavy in the prison air. Hope and doom side by side, both equally certain in Joseph's prophetic understanding. 3 days later, on Pharaoh's birthday, when he made a feast for all his servants, everything happened exactly as Joseph had foretold. The chief cupbearer was restored to his position, once again placing the cup in Pharaoh's hand, while the chief baker was hanged, his fate sealed just as Joseph had predicted. Yet the chief cupbearer, restored to his comfortable position, surrounded again by the luxury of Pharaoh's court, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him entirely, and Joseph remained in prison, forgotten by man but not by God. 2 full years passed, years of monotonous prison life, of daily disappointments, as Joseph perhaps hoped each day that this would be the day the cupbearer would remember, the day his deliverance would come. 730 days of maintaining faith, when every evidence suggested he had been abandoned. Then Pharaoh himself dreamed dreams that disturbed his sleep and troubled his spirit. In his first dream, Pharaoh stood by the Nile, the lifeblood of Egypt, and saw 7 cows, handsome and fat, come up out of the river and feed in the reed grass. Then 7 other cows, ugly and thin, came up after them and stood beside them on the bank of the river. The ugly thin cows ate up the 7 handsome fat cows, yet remained as gaunt as before. Pharaoh woke, disturbed by this vision, but fell asleep again only to dream a second dream. This time 7 ears of grain, plump and good, were growing on one stalk. Then 7 ears, thin and blighted by the east wind, sprouted after them. The thin ears swallowed up the 7 plump, full ears. When morning came, Pharaoh's spirit was troubled. He called for all the magicians and wise men of Egypt, those who claimed to understand the language of dreams, who studied the ancient texts and practiced the sacred arts. He told them his dreams, but none could interpret them to Pharaoh's satisfaction. Their explanations rang hollow, their wisdom insufficient for these particular visions. It was then, finally, that the chief cupbearer remembered Joseph. Perhaps the similarity of the situation dreams needing interpretation finally jogged his memory. Or perhaps it was divine timing that made him remember at precisely this moment. He spoke to Pharaoh, confessing his fault in forgetting, telling of the young Hebrew slave who had accurately interpreted dreams in prison, how everything had come to pass exactly as Joseph had said. Pharaoh immediately sent for Joseph, and they hurriedly brought him out of the dungeon. Joseph shaved and changed his clothes, transforming himself from prisoner to presenter before the most powerful man in Egypt. When he stood before Pharaoh, the king said to him, "I have had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it." Joseph's response demonstrated both humility and faith. "It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer." Shosht. Even standing before the throne of Egypt with his freedom potentially hanging in the balance, Joseph gave credit to God, refusing to claim divine abilities for himself. Pharaoh recounted his dreams in detail, adding nuances that revealed how deeply they had affected him, how the ugly cows remained just as ugly after devouring the fat ones, how the thin ears of grain were blighted by the scorching east wind. Joseph listened carefully, and then, with the same clarity and certainty he had shown in prison, he began to speak. "Pharaoh's dreams are one," Joseph declared. "God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dreams are one. The 7 lean and ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty ears blighted by the east wind are also 7 years of famine. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. There will come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt, but after them will arise 7 years of famine, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt. The famine will consume the land, and the plenty will be unknown in the land by reason of the famine that will follow, for it will be very severe." Joseph continued, explaining that the doubling of Pharaoh's dream meant that the thing was fixed by God and would shortly come to pass. But Joseph did not stop with interpretation. He offered a solution, a plan born perhaps from his years of managing Potiphar's household and organizing the prison. "Now therefore let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh proceed to appoint overseers over the land, and take 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt during the 7 plentiful years. Let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh for food in the cities, and let them keep it. That food shall be a reserve for the land against the 7 years of famine that are to occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land may not perish through the famine." The proposal was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of all his servants. Pharaoh said to his servants, "Can we find a man like this, in whom is the Spirit of God?" Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has shown you all this, there is none so discerning and wise as you are. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall order themselves as you command. Only as regards the throne will I be greater than you." In a moment, in the speaking of words and the granting of authority, Joseph's life transformed completely. Pharaoh took his signet ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, clothed him in garments of fine linen, and put a gold chain about his neck. He made him ride in his 2nd chariot, and they called out before him, "Bow the knee." Thus he set him over all the land of Egypt. Pharaoh gave Joseph the name Zaphanath-Paneah, and gave him in marriage Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh. 13 years had passed since his brothers sold him into slavery. 13 years of preparation for this moment, of maintaining faith through pit and prison, through false accusation and forgotten promises. During the 7 plentiful years, the earth produced abundantly. Joseph gathered up all the food of these 7 years and stored it in the cities, placing in every city the food from the fields around it. He stored up grain in great abundance, like the sand of the sea, until he ceased to measure it, for it could not be measured. The transformation of Egypt's agricultural system under Joseph's management was complete and efficient, turning the nation into a massive granary. During these years of plenty, Asenath bore Joseph 2 sons. He called the firstborn Manasseh, saying, "God has made me forget all my hardship and all my father's house." The second he called Ephraim, "For God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction." These names revealed Joseph's complex emotional state, grateful for his current blessings, yet carrying the deep wound of separation from his family. Then the 7 years of plenty came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph had said. There was famine in all lands, but in all the land of Egypt there was bread. When all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, "Go to Joseph. What he says to you, do." The famine had spread over all the land, and Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians. Moreover, all the earth came to Egypt to Joseph to buy grain, because the famine was severe over all the earth. Back in Canaan, Jacob and his family felt the grip of famine tightening around them. The old patriarch, still mourning Joseph, whom he believed dead, heard that there was grain in Egypt. "Why do you look at one another?" he said to his sons with some of his old sharpness. "Behold, I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down and buy grain for us there, that we may live and not die." So 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain in Egypt. But Jacob did not send Benjamin, Joseph's brother and Rachel's only surviving son, with his brothers, for he feared that harm might happen to him. The loss of Joseph had made Jacob fiercely protective of Benjamin, clinging to this last piece of Rachel with desperate love. The brothers came to Egypt and bowed themselves before Joseph with their faces to the ground, fulfilling the very dream that had sparked their hatred all those years ago. Joseph saw his brothers and recognized them, but he treated them like strangers and spoke roughly to them. His appearance had changed dramatically. He was clean-shaven in the Egyptian style, dressed in fine linen, speaking Egyptian, wielding the power of the second highest position in the land. They had no reason to connect this powerful Egyptian official with the 17-year-old boy they had sold into slavery. "Where do you come from?" Joseph demanded through an interpreter, though he understood every word they spoke. "From the land of Canaan, to buy food," they answered. "You are spies," Joseph accused them. "You have come to see the nakedness of the land." "No, my lord," they protested. "Your servants have come to buy food. We are all sons of one man. We are honest men. Your servants have never been spies." But Joseph persisted in his accusation, and in their defense, they revealed more about their family. "We, your servants, are 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. And behold, the youngest is this day with our father, and one is no more." That phrase, "one is no more," must have struck Joseph's heart like a physical blow. Is that how they dismissed his disappearance? how they explained his absence to others, how they had perhaps come to believe it themselves. Joseph insisted they were spies and said they would be tested. One brother would go and bring the youngest while the rest remained in prison. He put them all together in custody for 3 days, time for them to feel the weight of confinement, to taste something of what he had experienced. On the 3rd day, Joseph said to them, "Do this and you will live, for I fear God. If you are honest men, let one of your brothers remain confined where you are in custody, and let the rest go and carry grain for the famine of your households, and bring your youngest brother to me. So your words will be verified, and you shall not die." The brothers, not knowing that Joseph understood them, spoke to one another in Hebrew, their guilt finally finding voice. "In truth we are guilty concerning our brother, in that we saw the distress of his soul, when he begged us and we did not listen. That is why this distress has come upon us." Reuben, who had tried to save Joseph, added, "Did I not tell you not to sin against the boy? But you did not listen. So now there comes a reckoning for his blood." Joseph turned away from them and wept, overwhelmed by hearing their admission of guilt, their recognition that their current troubles were connected to their treatment of him. When he had composed himself, he returned and spoke to them, taking Simeon from among them and binding him before their eyes, choosing the second eldest, perhaps because Reuben had tried to save him. Joseph gave orders to fill their bags with grain, to replace every man's money in his sack, and to give them provisions for the journey. As they loaded their donkeys and departed, one of them opened his sack to give his donkey fodder at a lodging place, and saw his money in the mouth of his sack. Their hearts failed them, and they turned trembling to one another, saying, "What is this that God has done to us?" When they returned to Jacob, they told him all that had happened. The harsh treatment, the accusation of spying, Simeon held hostage, the demand to bring Benjamin. As they emptied their sacks, every man's bundle of money was in his sack, and when they and their father saw the bundles of money, they were afraid. Jacob's response was a cry of accumulated grief. "You have bereaved me of my children. Joseph is no more, and Simeon is no more, and now you would take Benjamin. All this has come against me." Reuben offered his own 2 sons as surety, saying Jacob could kill them if he didn't bring Benjamin back, but Jacob refused. "My son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he is the only one left. If harm should happen to him on the journey that you are to make, you would bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to Sheol." But the famine continued, relentless and severe. When they had eaten the grain they had brought from Egypt, Jacob said, "Go again, buy us a little food." But Judah reminded him that the man had solemnly warned them they would not see his face unless their brother was with them. The argument that followed revealed the family dynamics. Jacob's accusatory, "Why did you treat me so badly as to tell the man that you had another brother?" Yet Toider, and the brothers' defensive response that the man had questioned them carefully about their family. Finally, Judah stepped forward with a proposal that showed how he had matured since the day he suggested selling Joseph. He offered himself as surety for Benjamin, taking personal responsibility. "Send the boy with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die, both we and you and also our little ones. I will be a pledge of his safety. From my hand you shall require him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, then let me bear the blame forever." Jacob, seeing no alternative, finally relented. "If it must be so, then do this. Take some of the choice fruits of the land in your bags, and carry a present down to the man, a little balm and a little honey, gum, myrrh, pistachio nuts, and almonds. Take double the money with you, and the money that was returned in the mouth of your sacks carry back with you. Perhaps it was an oversight. Take also your brother, and arise, go again to the man. May God Almighty grant you mercy before the man, and may he send back your other brother and Benjamin. And as for me, if I am bereaved of my children, I am bereaved. The brothers took the present, double the money, and Benjamin, and made their way back to Egypt. When Joseph saw Benjamin with them, his own brother, his mother's son, he said to the steward of his house, "Bring the men into the house, and slaughter an animal and make ready, for the men are to dine with me at noon." The brothers were afraid when they were brought to Joseph's house, thinking they were being brought in because of the money that had been replaced in their sacks. They approached the steward and explained about the money, how they had brought it back along with additional money to buy food. But the steward reassured them, "Peace to you, do not be afraid. Your God and the God of your father has put treasure in your sacks for you. I received your money." Then he brought Simeon out to them. When Joseph came home, they brought him the present they had carried into the house, and bowed down to him to the ground. He asked them of their welfare, and said, "Is your father well, the old man of whom you spoke? Is he still alive?" "Your servant our father is well. He is still alive," they answered, bowing their heads and prostrating themselves. Joseph lifted up his eyes and saw his brother Benjamin, and said, "Is this your youngest brother, of whom you spoke to me?" Then he said, "God be gracious to you, my son." But the sight of Benjamin, now a grown man when Joseph had last seen him as a child, overwhelmed him. Joseph hurried out, for his compassion grew warm for his brother, and he sought a place to weep. He entered his chamber and wept there, then washed his face and came out, controlling himself, and said, "Serve the food." They served him by himself, and them by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with him by themselves, because the Egyptians could not eat with the Hebrews, for that was an abomination to the Egyptians. The brothers were seated before him, the firstborn according to his birthright and the youngest according to his youth. And they looked at one another in amazement, wondering how this Egyptian knew their birth order. Portions were taken to them from Joseph's table, but Benjamin's portion was 5 times as much as any of theirs. Joseph then devised one final test, instructing his steward to fill the men's sacks with food and return their money, but also to put his silver cup in the youngest brother's sack. At dawn, the brothers were sent away with their donkeys, but they had not gone far from the city when Joseph sent his steward after them. The steward overtook them and accused them of stealing the silver cup used for divination. The brothers protested their innocence vehemently, so certain of their honesty that they declared, "Whichever of your servants it is found with shall die, and we also will be my lord's servants." The steward agreed to a modified version. The one with whom it was found would become a servant, while the rest would be innocent. Each man quickly lowered his sack to the ground and opened it. The steward searched, beginning with the eldest and ending with the youngest, and the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. They tore their clothes in anguish, loaded their donkeys, and returned to the city. When Judah and his brothers came to Joseph's house, he was still there. They fell before him to the ground, and Joseph said to them, "What deed is this that you have done? Do you not know that a man like me can indeed practice divination?" Judah's response was one of defeated acceptance. "What shall we say to my lord? What shall we speak? Or how can we clear ourselves? God has found out the guilt of your servants. Behold, we are my lord's servants, both we and he also in whose hand the cup has been found." But Joseph insisted that only the one with the cup would be his servant. The rest could go in peace to their father. It was then that Judah approached Joseph and delivered one of the most moving speeches in all of Scripture, a plea that revealed how profoundly the brothers had changed since that day they sold Joseph into slavery. "Oh, my lord," Judah began, "please let your servant speak a word in my lord's ears, and let not your anger burn against your servant, for you are like Pharaoh himself." He recounted the whole story, how they had told him about their youngest brother, how their father had been reluctant to send him, how he, Judah, had offered himself as surety. Then he revealed something the brothers had never explicitly stated before, something that showed their understanding of their father's heart. "We have a father, an old man, and a young brother, the child of his old age. His brother is dead, and he alone is left of his mother's children, and his father loves him." Judah continued, painting a picture of what would happen if they returned without Benjamin. "As soon as he sees that the boy is not with us, he will die, and your servants will bring down the gray hairs of your servant our father with sorrow to Sheol." Then came Judah's ultimate offer, the proof of his transformation. "Now therefore, please let your servant remain, instead of the boy as a servant to my lord, and let the boy go back with his brothers. For how can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? I fear to see the evil that would find my father." This was the same Judah who had suggested selling Joseph, now offering himself as a slave to save Benjamin, to spare his father the pain of losing Rachel's second son. The brothers who had once been callous to their father's grief were now willing to sacrifice themselves to prevent causing him more pain. Joseph could control himself no longer. The test was complete. His brothers had proven their change of heart. He cried out, "Make everyone go out from me." So no Egyptian stood with him, while Joseph made himself known to his brothers. He wept aloud, so loudly that the Egyptians heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard it. "I am Joseph," he said to his brothers. "Is my father still alive?" But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed and terrified at his presence. The powerful Egyptian official before whom they had bowed, who held their lives in his hands, was the brother they had sold into slavery. "Come near to me, please," Joseph said, his voice gentler now. And they came near. "I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves, because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are yet 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God." In this moment of revelation, Joseph displayed a profound understanding of divine providence. He saw his suffering not as meaningless cruelty, but as part of a greater plan to save his family and many others from starvation. He had transformed his pain into purpose, his betrayal into blessing. Joseph continued, urgency in his voice, "He has made me a father to Pharaoh, and lord of all his house and ruler over all the land of Egypt. Hurry and go up to my father and say to him, 'Thus says your son Joseph, God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, do not tarry. You shall dwell in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near me, you and your children and your children's children, and your flocks, your herds, and all that you have. There I will provide for you, for there are yet 5 years of famine to come, so that you and your household, and all that you have, do not come to poverty." Then Joseph fell upon his brother Benjamin's neck and wept, and Benjamin wept upon his neck. He kissed all his brothers and wept upon them. After that, his brothers talked with him. The dam of 22 years finally broken, words flowing like water after a long drought. The news reached Pharaoh's house. Joseph's brothers have come. It pleased Pharaoh and his servants well. Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Say to your brothers, 'Do this, load your beasts and go back to the land of Canaan, and take your father and your households, and come to me, and I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you shall eat the fat of the land.' And you, Joseph, are commanded to say, 'Do this, take wagons from the land of Egypt for your little ones, and for your wives, and bring your father, and come. Have no concern for your goods, for the best of all the land of Egypt is yours.' Joseph gave them wagons according to the command of Pharaoh, and gave them provisions for the journey. To each and all of them he gave a change of clothes, but to Benjamin he gave 300 shekels of silver and 5 changes of clothes. To his father he sent 10 donkeys loaded with the good things of Egypt, and 10 female donkeys loaded with grain, bread, and provision for his father on the journey. As he sent his brothers away, Joseph said to them, 'Do not quarrel on the way.' He knew them well, knew that the revelation and its implications might cause recriminations and arguments about the past, but this was a time for moving forward, not looking back. The brothers traveled back to Canaan, their hearts and minds full of the extraordinary reversal they had witnessed. When they came to Jacob, their father, in the land of Canaan, they told him, 'Joseph is still alive, and he is ruler over all the land of Egypt.' Jacob's heart became numb, for he did not believe them. The statement was too impossible, too wonderful, too contrary to over 20 years of mourning. But when they told him all the words of Joseph, which he had said to them, and when he saw the wagons that Joseph had sent to carry him, the spirit of their father Jacob revived. 'It is enough,' Israel said. 'Joseph my son is still alive. I will go and see him before I die.' So Israel took his journey with all that he had, and came to Beersheba, where he offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. God spoke to Israel in visions of the night, calling, 'Jacob, Jacob,' and he responded, 'Here I am.' 'I am God, the God of your father,' came the divine voice. 'Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for there I will make you into a great nation. I myself will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also bring you up again, and Joseph's hand shall close your eyes.' With this divine assurance, Jacob set out from Beersheba. The sons of Israel carried Jacob their father, their little ones, and their wives, in the wagons that Pharaoh had sent. They also took their livestock and their goods, which they had gained in the land of Canaan, and came into Egypt, Jacob, and all his offspring with him. The complete family that went to Egypt numbered 70 persons, the seed of what would become a great nation. Jacob sent Judah ahead to Joseph to show the way before him to Goshen. When they arrived in the land of Goshen, Joseph prepared his chariot and went up to meet Israel his father. The moment of reunion after 22 years of separation was overwhelming. Joseph presented himself to his father, fell on his neck, and wept on his neck a good while. Israel said to Joseph, "Now let me die, since I have seen your face and know that you are still alive." Joseph then prepared his brothers and father to meet Pharaoh, instructing them to emphasize that they were shepherds, for every shepherd was an abomination to the Egyptians, ensuring they would be allowed to dwell apart in Goshen, rather than being absorbed into Egyptian society. When Pharaoh met them and confirmed they could dwell in Goshen, even suggesting that any capable men among them could be put in charge of Pharaoh's own livestock, the family's position in Egypt was secured. Jacob was brought before Pharaoh, and the old patriarch blessed the young king, a moment of profound significance. the bearer of God's promises, blessing the most powerful ruler of the age. When Pharaoh asked Jacob how many were the days of the years of his life, Jacob responded, "The days of the years of my sojourning are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, and they have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their sojourning." Meanwhile, the famine continued to ravage the land. Joseph's administration of the crisis was both effective and transformative. First, he sold grain for money until all the money in Egypt and Canaan was gathered into Pharaoh's house. When the money was gone, the people came offering their livestock in exchange for bread, and Joseph supplied them that year in exchange for all their animals. The following year, with nothing left but their bodies and lands, the people offered themselves and their land to Pharaoh in exchange for seed and bread. Thus Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh, and the people became servants from one end of Egypt to the other, except for the land of the priests, which remained their own. Joseph then established a law that Pharaoh should have the 5th part of all produce, except from the land of the priests. This transformation of Egypt's economic structure would last for generations, with Joseph remembered as the Savior who preserved the nation through the years of famine. Israel dwelt in the land of Egypt, in the land of Goshen, and they gained possessions there, and were fruitful and multiplied greatly. Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years, the same number of years he had with Joseph before his son was sold into slavery, as if Providence had restored to him the exact time that had been stolen. When the time drew near that Israel must die, he called Joseph and made him swear to deal kindly and truly with him, not to bury him in Egypt, but to carry him out of Egypt and bury him in the burial place of his fathers, in the cave of Machpelah, that Abraham had purchased. Joseph swore to do as his father asked. Later, when Jacob grew ill, Joseph brought his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, to his father. Jacob, though his eyes were dim with age, blessed Joseph's sons, but in blessing them, he crossed his hands, placing his right hand on Ephraim, the younger, and his left on Manasseh, the firstborn. When Joseph saw this, he tried to correct his father, but Jacob refused, saying, "I know, my son, I know. He also shall become a people, and he also shall be great. Nevertheless, his younger brother shall be greater than he." The pattern continued. The younger elevated over the elder, a thread running through the family's history. From Isaac over Ishmael, Jacob over Esau, Joseph over his brothers, and now Ephraim over Manasseh. In blessing Joseph's sons, Jacob essentially gave Joseph a double portion, the right of the firstborn, though he was the 11th son. Then Jacob called all his sons together for a final blessing, prophesying over each one, speaking words that would echo through the centuries. To Reuben, the firstborn, he spoke of instability. To Simeon and Levi, of their violence. To Judah, he gave the promise of kingship, that the scepter would not depart from him until Shiloh comes. Each son received words suited to his character and destiny, painting a picture of the 12 tribes that would emerge from them. When Jacob finished commanding his sons, he drew up his feet into the bed and breathed his last, being gathered to his people. Joseph fell upon his father's face, wept over him, and kissed him. He commanded the physicians to embalm his father, a process that took 40 days, and the Egyptians wept for him 70 days, showing the respect Egypt had for the father of their Savior. Joseph received permission from Pharaoh to go up and bury his father as he had sworn. It was a great procession that went up to Canaan. All the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of his house, all the elders of the land of Egypt, all the house of Joseph, his brothers, and his father's house, along with chariots and horsemen. At the threshing floor of Atad, beyond the Jordan, they held a very great and grievous mourning, 7 days of lamentation for Jacob. After burying their father in the cave of Machpelah, Joseph and his brothers returned to Egypt. But with Jacob gone, the brothers feared that Joseph might now take his revenge. They sent a message to Joseph, claiming that their father had commanded before his death that Joseph should forgive their transgression. When Joseph received this message, he wept, understanding that his brothers still feared him, still did not fully trust his forgiveness. The brothers came and fell down before him, saying, "Behold, we are your servants." But Joseph said to them, "Do not fear, for am I in the place of God? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive, as they are today. So do not fear. I will provide for you and your little ones." Thus he comforted them and spoke kindly to them, demonstrating a forgiveness that was complete and unconditional. Joseph lived to see his children and grandchildren. Even the children of Machir the son of Manasseh were counted as Joseph's own. When Joseph's time came to die at the age of 110, he said to his brothers, "I am about to die, but God will visit you and bring you up out of this land to the land that he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob." Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, saying, "God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here." So Joseph died, and they embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. But his bones would not remain there forever. His faith looked forward to the promise, to the day when his people would return to the land God had sworn to give them. Even in death, Joseph's hope was anchored not in the grandeur of Egypt where he had risen to such heights, but in the promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, promises that would outlive pyramids and kingdoms.